Greetings, and thank you for joining our conversation on transforming US AI policies under the next Trump administration. There is a lot of anticipation, and I would say concern among the experts and the public about what will happen with AI guardrails currently existing in the President Biden's executive order once President-elect Trump, who will become president, as he promised, will repeal Biden's executive order on the first day and replace it with his own. What will transition, if anything? It's reassuring to think that President-elect Trump is not starting from a blank page. While he was president during his first term, he did issue executive order regulating AI, and it was pretty reassuring because it contained quite a few provisions providing enforcement for safety of AI, provision against the biases, discrimination. But since then, the policy has changed. And we heard during the campaign how the incoming administration plans to make America first, including in the AI race. So even though incoming Vice President-elect J.D. Vance mentioned OpenAI as a hedge against big tech, making sure that small companies can innovate and create AI efficiently and compete with the big tech. What will happen with the OpenAI is now unknown because the defense community is very adamant about the escalating risks of having OpenAI being accessible, continue to be accessible to adversaries like China. It is clear that America first in the AI race will continue prevailing in the post-campaign period because it's one of the utmost priorities for incoming President Trump and his team to assure that America leads in all fronts. Just yesterday, I watched the broadcast, the program 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, which featured the growing risk and really terrible situation in now many schools when images of children are being exploited and doctored and then posted on social networks. There is this section 230 of the outdated 1996 Communications Decency Act, which now allows platforms to stay immune when they distribute this kind of a material. So hopefully the incoming administration will consider including this provision either by modifying the act or by having the provisions in the executive order. So there is a lot that remains to be done to assure that that AI continues to be developed, but at the same time being safe. Another very important consideration is how far will the executive order go in eliminating restrictions, and at the same time we have to continue working with our allies. And for example, in the EU, there is the EU AI Act, which is very restrictive. AI doesn't know borders. So in order for us to efficiently govern AI, and with the generative AI, the risks of AI being unhinged go as far as becoming existential. So we absolutely have to collaborate with our allies to assure that AI is governed or at least, regulated to some extent, and the rules of the game are harmonized. We cannot solve everything today. We're just starting, we're launching our conversation to collect the opinions from the experts, from the community, to assure that we have a voice. And when we reach out to the new administration and incoming Congress, we're heard. I'm delighted to turn the floor to our moderator, our AI guy, who is the director of Global Alliance on Sustainability AI Education, Tom Testi. Tom, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, I'm Tom. I've been a software engineer for 40 years. I've seen lots of trends and lots of things go on during that time period. And I got into, well, I technically got into AI in the fashion of neural networks back in '95 when I was at Seagate. We were using that to predict drive failures with a good amount of success. Fast forward to 2022 and the explosion of AI, I got more serious about it, and I left my work at Paycom to jump in and start learning about it. And now I do consulting work. I do one-on-one training. I'm known as the ethical AI guy because I teach people how to use it without plagiarizing somebody else, without making themselves sound like robots and all the other things. There's a lot of ways you can use AI responsibly without just taking away your own creative abilities. So I've been doing that since 2022. So basically it's been 2 years now. And that's effectively who I am. I'm working on building another business. So, I've been in business for a long time, and I just enjoy new technology. So I guess we're going to go with Eric first. Let me unmute Eric. If I can find my cursor, there we go. And if you want to introduce yourself and who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Eric Postow. I'm a managing partner and chief strategy officer for Holon Law Partners. We're about 1.5-year-old virtual remote law firm. We specialize in highly regulated industry spaces and emerging spaces. The design is a holonic systems design. We build for a lot of overlap to incentivize collaboration within our firm. And we're impact oriented, really focusing ourselves on areas of law and society where lots of transformation is happening. So it's no wonder why I'm sitting here with you all today. AI, in our view, is probably the most transformative thing that's happened in any of our lifetimes, for sure. And we wanted to take a holonic view or a holistic view of what the AI space was and what it might become. And we're thinking globally. In our perspective, I was out there observing other major law firms, and I noticed a trend that they were simply looking at their security, privacy, data security, privacy sections and writing a comma AI. And some of those attorneys are really sharp and they know a lot about LLMs. But in my mind, I thought it was just a little too linear, and that AI was a much more nonlinear exercise. And our approach is to build a microcosm within our AI practice group, of which I chair, looking at the rest of our industries and how is AI impacting those spaces. So for example, we have a cannabis practice and a hemp practice. We have a strong IP practice, litigation, we're in video games and all kinds of neat places. And we're getting to look at AI where it's meeting those spaces so that we can collectivize an intelligence about what AI is doing in the various industry segments that we work in. Being here right outside DC and having worked in the DC scene and marketplace for a long time, we have an approach to government affairs that's very unique and built on relationships. And right now we're gathering our network and people who are interested in the various policies that we're evaluating. And we're starting to just make those connections, light up those nodes, get folks talking about AI from a variety of different lenses, and to move away from a straight line path of what these things are, because quite frankly, nobody knows what this stuff is. You really have to get pretty far out into the future to really start to think about what does policy look like. My colleague Damien said earlier today, it's really about looking out and thinking about what are we going to take for granted in the future, and then start working backwards from there. So I think our law firm is perfectly situated to be a front runner in the AI legal policy, regulatory compliance space. This is our strength. We're used to patchwork of states in the United States, which is what it's very much looking like. Seems unrealistic to imagine too many comprehensive regulatory frameworks coming out in the next 4 years. We're in a process of reimagining ourselves from a government perspective. If you just think objectively about what you're seeing, what does a Trump administration look like? Well, it looks like we got to rethink how government operates, streamlining things, downsizing things. If you consider the Supreme Court and where it's come in the last year with its Loper-Bright decision, a lot of the agency power has been severely reduced, which means Congress is going to have a much higher, pragmatic, you have to make things make sense for right now. And with AI, it's almost impossible. And if you thought there was a problem with bipartisanship before, I think we're going to find that this becomes, just like a lot of other things, a very political kind of issue between creative types that want an open-ended sandbox to go play in, to design the innovative technologies that are going to transform everything that we do in all of our spaces. And then the other legitimate concerns about, well, what do we do about these harmful things that are happening? Or what do we do in the global competitive space when some countries don't want to play by any rules whatsoever, and we want to limit ourselves this way or that way? So anyway, I have the fun job of getting to think about all these wonderful things. I advise businesses in the AI space, and I'm learning from a fire hose from really smart people who know a whole lot about this technology. And still, I wonder if we're thinking far enough ahead as to what's the real world look like 20 years from now, after we have developed this well beyond what anyone can imagine sitting here today. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm happy to talk about laws and policies and where things are going, and be a part of this collaborative conversation, because quite frankly, that's what has to happen. We need to bring a whole ecosystem of people who are interested in this topic together to start talking about risks and opportunities and challenges and creative thoughts and all these things. And so I'm very pleased to be with you all today to share my thoughts and to learn from you guys. So thanks for having me.
Can I ask you a question, Eric? How much regulation are you up for? Do you think that regulation is going to stifle development?
I mean, it depends what we're talking about. I think that, a lot of the concerns of risks and harms are already addressed in current law. Child pornography is already illegal, folks, and AI generated child pornography, while horrendous, is already criminalized. And I don't necessarily think we need to tackle that as a first issue. And I don't think that we want to be at a place of like fear-based decision-making or urgency or doomsday, this or that or third. I think we need to have a collaborative, let's figure out what we've got. Let's bring a lot of stakeholders to the table and think about what makes sense. What are the guardrails? What could be the guardrails? Do we want a decentralized system that empowers more people? And considering the risk of centralized powering into the major powerful corporations, that's certainly something we may want to talk about. How do we make sure that the playing field is left as even as possible to avoid that concentration or centralization of certain powers? So I think it can limit creativity, and I think we should be very mindful of that. And I don't want to do too many. I don't want to address problems that are already solved with new legislation. I'd rather update old law to clearly include AI generated content, things like that from a harms perspective.
So like with 230, you'd rather just see it updated.
Yeah, probably so. I mean, what we're talking about there is accountability.
Yeah.
And there's liability if I'm Facebook and someone comes on my platform and posts something that's harmful. Was it my fault? It depends, right? But in a sense of what if I'm an AI creator, I create an AI and then you use it and you do something, but it was my AI technology and my data and all this stuff that created that. Is there liability for me? Like, it's a very interesting question. I think you just update that to say, obviously, yes, this would include to create expectations for everybody right now, so that you can take some of that. Well, it's really ambiguous, and we're not quite sure if it fits this thing. It's like, well, yeah, it fits. Let's move on to the next question.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to realize that it's only going to get worse, because what we have right now is generative AI. It's not real AI that thinks for itself. And eventually we're going to get there. And that's where we got to also keep in mind, keep in the forefront, because those kind of things are going to come about.
I think convergence is an important word that we should be looking at. I've heard, I read a recent Wall Street Journal article where someone in the know was describing, AI and crypto as two completely separate things. And, I don't think that they are. And I think that if you get far enough ahead, you're going to see that convergence point. And so you should be predictive in those ways. AI and social media, there's a convergence point. And so when you think about policies and regulations, that you want to get far enough down the road where you find the obvious melting point of all of these things, and try to imagine policy from that perspective. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Can I interject quickly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
So, Eric, I agree and disagree with you to the point, this pontification about 230 is dragging for God knows how long. And I think we can be like coy about what is happening to victims of this declothe and nudify. It's until it's somebody's kid who becomes a victim, it's impossible to comprehend what kind of consequences, like, God forbid, for each of us might evolve from this kind of tragedy. So I think modifying 230 is kind of urgent. Why shall platforms be immune from responsibility if they have a way to filter the material? It was done during the election cycle. Political posts that were labeled as misinformation were taken down. So why can't these kinds of posts with distribution of pornographic material, which is a criminal act, but it is not enforced, platforms have no responsibility. And I think until and unless there is a liability for participation in this action, nothing will change.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts. I mean, look, I have two daughters. I certainly think about the risks and the real world situation of what this technology can do. I just think that you really want to take a hard look at what laws are already in place and enforce those. And I think that you're going to find some liability for criminal misconduct, and especially when the platform is complicit in some ways or knows what's going on, or that's what it was designed for. So I'm not saying that you're wrong, and I'm just saying we should really take a step back and evaluate the larger ecosystem before we start just rendering any new policy. But I don't think I disagree with you in terms of the harm of what you're describing is very harmful for society. And I think most reasonable people would agree with you and say we want to regulate that out. We want to keep it criminal. But I think it's you don't want to do wide brushstrokes here. That's all I'm saying.
Tom, I just heard from Larry, there is some kind of an emergency there. Nathalie, would you mind if we let Larry speak briefly, and then we'll give the floor to you.
Great.
Okay. All right, Larry.
Sure.
Is this yours, Larry?
Yes, that's mine. Yes.
Okay.
We did not encourage slide presentations, Larry.
Okay, well, I don't have to share if you don't want. That's fine.
Yeah, I think what we can do, we can post it.
Sure.
Please describe it, and then we will find a way to post it. I'm pretty sure it's very impressive.
That's fine. Sure.
Can you
Tell us
more
about yourself
and the organization that you are creating? You are one of the Stanford guys, and of course, there is the line of thought that is kind of projected by Stanford. And we'd like to hear from you. What is it that you are trying to accomplish with your new organization, the 513, this human AI?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so my background, I did my PhD at Stanford, really studying risk in product development, sort of understanding, hey, what are sort of the consequences of changes. And so back then, I worked a lot with companies like GE Aircraft Engines, NASA, ABB, sort of understanding sort of how to sort of think through this process. And so it's really interesting to sort of see sort of the work I did back then sort of loop around with some of the work I'm doing today. And so my day job is I work with a startup that's basically building a platform for AI governance. And so I've been working, a lot with CTOs and CISOs, sort of understanding sort of how do they sort of build these sort of AI technology products. But what I've been doing, as Helen and Tom mentioned, is I've been working with a nonprofit called the Ethical AI Governance Group. And what we are trying to do is really accelerate responsible AI innovation. And so our goal is really to create a future of human-centric AI. And so we were started about 3 years ago, basically an offshoot of Benhamu Global Ventures. Anik Bose was the managing director. He helped sort of found this. But we basically saw the need to sort of, really take an active role with AI because we think, the next 3 years are really going to shape the future of AI and our world. And so, having sort of done some scenario planning, we see a lot of different ways that this can go. I think right now we see, much of this AI innovation is really being driven by, really big tech. 4 or 5, big American companies really dominate the conversation. They have the resources, they have the data to sort of really, sort of drive AI. We're seeing, some forces from the public sector in terms of governance of this, and EU AI Act, number of frameworks from NIST and in Singapore are sort of changing that. And so the question is, how does that sort of impact the rate of innovation, as I think as Eric and Helen sort of mentioned. And so the things that we're sort of cautious about is sort of this divide that can happen. It's like we want to make sure that AI isn't really an arms race, and it's not between big companies and small companies. It's not between public and private. It's not between certain markets like the U.S. and China or whatnot. And so our goal is we want to sort of take a position of how can we sort of really advance human-centric AI. And so we hear terms like ethical AI, responsible AI, human-centric AI, all used somewhat interchangeably. And I think obviously there's a lot in common with them, but there are some unique subtleties that sort of distinguish one from the other. And so to date, what we've been doing is really building a community to sort of drive the conversation around responsible AI. And so with the Ethical AI Governance Group, we've built a community of about 5,000 AI practitioners, and we've put together a number of interesting content, webinars, annual report. And some of the trends we're seeing right now is really around, the domination by big tech, sort of the challenges in corporate adoption of AI, and lastly, sort of this opportunity for sort of human-centric AI. And so that's why our goal to sort of be more than just a voice in this is to really talk about how can we actually build this ecosystem for human-centric AI, and what can we do to sort of basically bridge the gap between innovation for the sake of innovation with innovation and human impact. And so one of the new initiatives we're launching next year is a mission-driven accelerator that's committed to advancing responsible AI innovation for the benefit of humanity. And we are basically looking at how can we sort of harness AI for the common good? How can we sort of foster long-term prosperity and societal progress for future generations? And so, like many accelerator programs, we're going to do things like have, mentorship, introductions to Silicon Valley, connections to investors and whatnot. But there's sort of two unique aspects that we have that we think will sort of make this program interesting to startups. I think number one is we're going to provide them with access to open source technology, AI safety framework. We have a responsible AI curriculum that's really sort of driving to ensure that, hey, basically responsible AI is sort of built into the DNA of the company from the very beginning. The other thing we want to do is really have really strong relationships with enterprises and to do pilots, POCs, these sort of design partnerships.
Can I interject for just 1 second?
Yes.
Can you please say, I give you a magic wand.
Yes.
How do you change the policies? What do you do policy-wise? Because I really would like for us to focus on the core subject of our event today, because we will take a note of recommendations and takeaways to share with the decision makers, both in administration and on the Hill. So if I give you a magic wand, what are the most pressing policy changes that need to be implemented urgently?
So, I mean, ultimately, what we are doing here is obviously we've been talking about sort of startup investors, but one of the key partnerships we're doing is really working with sort of governments. And, we've been talking to, the European Union. We've talked to people here in, California. We've talked to people in Singapore and sort of the Middle East, and sort of figure out how do you sort of really establish a innovation sort of ecosystem. And so I think a lot of what we think here is we want to basically enable the sort of the next generation of innovation to sort of really happen. And we think, like I said, this is not a investor-only conversation. This is not a corporate-only conversation.
But how
we need to have sort of public voices in there.
Fire it into policy change. Exactly. What do you need in the policy change or this regulatory ecosystem to support what you and the team are doing?
Yeah, like I said, we don't see it as necessarily policy change. The idea is how do we sort of work these frameworks, the things like the EU AI Act, things like the NIST framework. How do we sort of basically better understand these things? How do we better communicate these to the startups and really be able to sort of essentially what we want to do is really create standards and benchmarks in terms of how do you sort of measure the responsible AI given sort of these works out there. And so, our goal, our strength is not as a engine for policy change. Our goal is to work with, the foundations, work with the government agencies to basically have a sort of a conversation around this versus necessarily advocating for any one specific policy.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Tom?
No problem.
Mm-hmm. Tom?
Yeah. Nathalie? Yeah. Or should do you want me to ask them a question? Well, let me ask you this question.
I would first of all like to say that I'm grateful to all of our participants, but I'm especially grateful to Nathalie, who is joining us. I don't know if she is in London or Paris today. There is a very significant time difference. And Nathalie is a real star in the AI experts world. She was one of the pioneers since early 90s, using some of the instruments which are now referred to as AI. And she definitely was a pioneer in her efforts in reducing bias in AI. So today, we're asking Nathalie, who is the president of the company Neurovalue, and she advises very senior executives in 62 countries. She worked on all the continents, and it would be really terrific to hear Nathalie's view, kind of analyzing the from the policy angle, and maybe touching base on competitive analysis, kind of comparability of US AI Act and existing US policy infrastructure, but we'll know is going to change very quickly.
Well, thank you, Helen, for having me. I'm in London tonight. And I'm really happy to be with you all and to listen to all your expertise. I have to say, when I hear what you are saying, that AI is like many innovations, it can be used for the good of humanity, of mankind, and then you can always have the sort of criminal and negative uses of any innovation. But as Helen said, I started using AI without even knowing it was AI back in the 90s. I was working in marketing at the time, and we had huge data sets, and we had problems to solve. And together with some developers and tech people, we came up with a very large algorithm to try to solve very simple questions which we couldn't really tackle well as humans, which was how to predict our market share and how to predict our volumes, because very often we had plants that produced the wrong products or the wrong quantities of products, ended up in lost sales or added stocks. And so I started being interested in those techniques very early on with a very practical standpoint. And then back in 2006, I started working on biases, and hence in 2016, I started helping a very large bank to try to debias some of the first AI systems they were using to analyze creditworthiness of individuals. Now, my experience, and again, perhaps it is different from other people's experience and perspective, but what we have to keep in mind, and this is also part of what was really important when the EU started working on its laws, is that AI very much sort of replicates the way the human mind operates. And a human mind, a normal human mind, makes biased decisions about 50% of the time. It's either because the result might not be very accurate or the result can be completely wrong. So once we have this in mind, we can better understand why many of the systems that use human-generated data have flaws. It's not the same for data using, for example, technical values and technical data to, let's say, predict how much electricity will be needed over the next months. But once we use human-generated data, the quantity of biases can be very significant. And so once we have this in mind, then we know that something needs to be done for AI to work better. And of course, we can think that people will work and do what's right to get the systems to work well. But regulations are also quite often very helpful. And so the European Union created this EU AI Act, which, when we look with difference with the Biden regulation, is much more detailed and provides, I would say much more specific guidance to people who are developing AI. And I've been with one of the largest incubator in Europe over the last 12 months. So I've seen people around me on a daily basis developing AI systems. And I tend to believe that having, I would say, more specific and precise rules is sometimes very helpful for people who are pretty young, quite often, developing large systems and working on very complex data. And so if we look at the details of the EU AI Act, there are basically four categories of AIs that have been included in the Act, defined in the Act. One is category of unacceptable risk, and this category will be forbidden completely beginning of February 2025. And that includes social scoring, real-time capture of biometric data, And also many instances of cognitive behavioral manipulation, such as, for example, children being manipulated with voices that might recognize, and so on and so forth. And there are others, of course. So when you look at the sort of criminal possible actions or implementations, they would be just forbidden in Europe starting beginning of next year. Now, I don't know exactly technically how this will be done, for example, by social networks. We don't have the answer according to my knowledge for now, but these ones will be ruled out. Then you have a second category, which is high risk applications of EU in the EU Act. And on these ones, the implementation is going to be progressive with up to 36 months for the AI developer to comply with the provisions of the AI EU Act. But basically you have here things which I think are just common sense. For example, you have categories such as aviation, medical devices, cars, lifts, and so on, which are already very regulated. And so now they're just going to check more and integrate the AI part of those devices, objects, and so on, than they were already regulated until now. Then you have more specific provisions which will need to be put in place, such as AI systems that will need to be registered on EU database. And from that database, some people will be able to check how the AI is actually working. And here we have a critical infrastructure management. So for example, electricity, grids, and so on. You have education, and this is going to be probably tricky because we could think of e-learning as part of that. You have employment, so resume, screening, and so on. Those systems will be at least to have some information on databases for them to be checked. And you have also anything which is related to law enforcement, which will also need to be inserted into those databases. And for these, the obligations are going to be very strict and are very specific. For example, they will need to be very specific mitigation systems. The quality of the databases will also need to be specified, and people might need to monitor and have the possibility to monitor the quality of the database. There will need to be some kind of human oversight on the quality of the outcome of those AIs, and so people will need to document the quality of the output. And there will be a whole set of criteria of robustness of the AI itself, cybersecurity, data oversight, and so on and so forth. So if I look around me, and perhaps some people might say it might stifle innovation, but at the same time, for people who are on the way to develop the right type of AI system, having this very specific list can also help them to make sure that they can develop an accurate system. And then you have another category, which is going to be of limited risk. And here, the EU AI Act asks for transparency, which are basically all the AIs that people interact with, such as chatbots. Sometimes people do not really know that they are interacting with the chatbot, and so it will need to be very specific that they are interacting with an artificial intelligence-driven system. And of course, generative AI also, we need to be more transparent because they will need to inform users on the sources that they have been using, which can be sometimes difficult for some systems because some systems have just dumped in data, not sometimes keeping the source. And so for some Gen AIs, I don't know really how they're going to tackle this and the amount of human resources they will need to use. Now, if we keep on this list, it's not finished yet, and some people might feel that it's overwhelming, but then you also need to keep in mind that GDPR is not going to be left out. So I would say, added complexity will be to mix in the EU AI Act with GDPR and how to tackle personal data. And also there is a provision in the EU AI Act that specifies that any kind of technological advance will need to be integrated in the EU AI Act, which does not yet cover agents, but agents are going to be covered very quickly. So That being said, my personal perspective, and this is only my personal perspective, but we can and of course we can discuss it. I think that we have also to keep in mind that for now, many organizations are conducting proof of concepts with AI. And depending on the data source we're using, between 6 and 12% of those proof of concepts are confirmed, including in the US, which is very low. And one of the key reasons why so few AIs are being adopted on a more long-term basis is that there is a sort of balance that the corporations are assessing between the quality of the outcome and the quality of the data produced by AI, which is often below expectations. The cost of AI itself, so all the servers and so on, plus the organizational cost of putting in place an AI. You need to train the people. You need to make sure they're not afraid of using an AI for various reasons. Plus, sometimes you need to reorganize your company to move people from one department to another or just to reduce number of heads. And that also has a cost. And so very often the balance between the three is not so positive. And I have to say that having better results or increasing the quality of the outcome is actually also going to substantially increase, in my opinion, the actual use of AI. Because if I take some practical example of, for example, employment, if you take one of the key systems currently being used by many corporations to screen resumes, you sometimes have very unexpected results. For example, I had an example where a company was sorting out resumes to fill in a position of an AI developer using LLMs and deep learning. And they had the quote unquote surprise of seeing that sometimes senior developers that did have all the technical competencies requested and required for the job were actually taken out by the AI. And so one of the things they did was to remove age from the resumes to make sure that the senior developers would not be taken out. And actually they found out that the percentage of people being left out after removing the age was even higher, which is unexpected. But again, if you know how biases work, very often when you conduct blind resume screening, actually the biases of the humans screening the resumes are actually increasing. And so one of the things you would need to make sure that the AI system work better is to make sure you really integrate the right level of expertise on unconscious bias and human cognitive bias. And so one of the things that they did in that example is to understand why those resumes were taken out. And very often what happened is that those people had worked on older language systems, for example, like COBOL, which is, people do not learn COBOL anymore. And so the AI saw that there was COBOL on the resume, associated COBOL with being old, so that usually elder developers were being taken out by the people who are screening the resumes. And so the AI took out all the elder developer resumes that had older languages on the resume, even when age was taken out. So here again, we have an example where for now, there is no real technical solution because you can't really remove so much information from the resumes because very often you don't know really what to remove, or you remove stuff which are interesting for the people. And so very often it's important just to understand how the system works to really put in place the right test and the right technical provisions. In that example, what they decided to do is that they checked on the age of the candidates and decided to get all the elder candidates' resumes to be screened by a human instead of being screened by an AI.
How can you translate it into policy? Would you suggest to consider that the updated US policy, in its part that will pertain to employment law as it relates to AI, would have a provision that this kind of biased restrictions or indicators, whatever the best term would be, shall be eliminated from profiling?
Well, perhaps Eric might have a different perspective from mine, but I think that for now, and perhaps it's there, I have a cultural bias here, but I think that the EU AI Act, when they mention very specific provisions, such as the fact that you need to make sure that there is no discrepancy on a social basis, on a demographic basis, is already one good step forward. But I'm not sure that any law by itself could make it. You do have the right law with the right type of, I would say, details to make sure it can be applied. But then I tend to believe,
because we have to be on schedule. But Nathalie, this is a very, very interesting discussion, conversation. You inspired me to create a special event on AI and profiling and employment. I
could just add one more thing, maybe.
Of course.
To try to get people to actually be willing to change and to make the right effort, because also it's gonna induce more people to use artificial intelligence. And I think that beyond the law itself, governmental agencies could also come in as support to help AI developers develop, I would say, better quality AI. And actually, I've seen this in Germany back in the years 2000s, where the agency that is controlling how personal data is being used very often had teams in the largest German companies that were actually not acting as regulators, controlling and putting in, I would say, negative limitations, but were more advising the organization and buyers to find solutions.
Yeah, like advisory capacity,
yes.
Like members of the team. This is very interesting. You really inspired me to create a special event, and Tom and I and the rest of our team at GASAI will work on it in the very near future, because it's a critically important matter. Discrimination unfortunately is not managed at the level where it could be, all these issues could be addressed timely and efficiently. So let's have a special event and discuss it at length. And thank you, Nathalie. For now, it's really thought-provoking, very, very helpful. So Tom, we now need to switch to probably Solomon, and then have all of our panel members probably make comments on the other panelists' presentations and share additional thoughts. And Solomon?
Tell us about yourself and what you do and
Thank you.
how you do it.
Thank you. I am currently the general partner of Emerging Technology Ventures at X Creative Lab. And there are several of my colleagues here today, so we're happy to participate and join into this conversation. My background is I'm a strategy and technology leader, former engineer as well. I have over 15 years experience in innovation, working with startups and at startups and different enterprise solutions. I've also led startup sourcing, evaluation, due diligence for over 100 million in strategic investments and acquisitions. I've also been fortunate enough to write articles and get published thought leadership pieces on technology, AI, and business strategy.
Okay, go ahead, Helen. Looked like you were gonna.
I was actually thinking. You had a great question that you ran by me when we discussed, Salomon's presentation. Would you like to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so Solomon, we have several partners participating on our panel today. What do you believe, as one of the senior members of the leadership team, what are the most pressing issues that have to be translated in the policy updates from your standpoint?
Thank you, Helen. So our team, we actually kind of discuss what kind of the highest priorities, and we kind of narrowed it down to AI liabilities. And the reason for that is there's specific policy goals that we want to address within that. So within AI liability and specifically policy goals, we believe that either governments, individuals, corporations, we all have to work collaboratively together. I think that was a theme that was kind of discussed previously. But the goals would be to protect individuals from harm caused by AI system, foster trust in AI technologies through transparency and accountability, promote innovation by providing clear guidelines and incentives for responsible development, and encourage international cooperation for consistent and fair AI regulation globally.
Well, this is very succinct, on the money. So we just recorded for the upcoming policy change to enforce.
Now, do you think, and I just have this general question, do you think we will eventually have to have something like an ISO 9001 for the quality of AI, an international kind of standard?
I think so. And I'm also not, I'm also not naive that that'd be very, very difficult, because I think we've seen how fast AI has evolved, and even if you talk to some very smart people, very technical people, they'll tell you that AI has been around for decades.
Yeah.
But I think especially after 2022 with ChatGPT, like kind of anybody can go to ChatGPT, play around with it, and kind of see how sophisticated it is. And even since 2022. We're sitting here at the end of 2024, these LLM models have gone so much more advanced. Some of the issues with hallucinations that we probably saw in the last few years, it's getting much, much better. And it's all kind of driven by the data available. And I think like we spent the last 10 years, we've kind of been in this like post-internet, like digital world. Like, I think the average person probably doesn't know how much data he or she generates, or how much corporations or organizations or even government entities collect that data and what they use for. And then so because AI is predicated on the data, and there's good data and bad data, but that amount of data really drives a lot of these AI systems and what they can do. So as far as some kind of regulations or management around these ISO policies, I think it is a goal to achieve, but I'm also again I agree, it would just it is kind of like trying to understand like how to manage AI, which is a very difficult endeavor. And so that's why one of the policy goals like our team has laid out is to kind of work collaboratively globally and then be consistent.
Well, I have a question for you. Forgive me if it will be a little tricky.
Okay.
I recently came across a presentation, actually 2 days ago, by Ilya Sutskever, who is a co-founder of OpenAI and who left OpenAI. We all were aware of the interesting disagreements between Sam Altman and other members of the team. So Ilya Sutskever left. And 2 days ago, in his presentation, he mentioned that actually the internet, it's basically the data for AI has reached its plateau or plateau, whatever pronunciation is, that it's being exhausted. I mean, there is just one internet, and pretty much all of the resources were already kind of vacuumed into AI. And the question is, there is a discussion about the synthetical data, right? So what's your thought is it acceptable to use it for training of the models? And it's very important now because the training of AI models is now like multi-model. There is a multi-modality trend in using text, video, audio, text, I mean, speech, whatever means that could be used, already used in this multi-modality mode. So now, if there is no new data and it will be synthesized, what are your thoughts? Can AI be trustworthy and reliable?
That's a great, fantastic question, Helen. I think my thoughts on that, maybe it's slightly different, but I think what you described is a little bit commonplace in terms of training AI models, because I'll start with this. When we talk about the internet, I would say predominantly the internet, the language of the internet tends predominantly English. And so that in itself, if you think about it, will kind of have its own inherent bias. So there's a lot of languages, there's so many languages in the world, but it's just a matter of digital maturity. But because like the internet in the US has a huge influence, a lot of that's in English. So that's just going to be biased with a lot of the models that we see. And I mentioned that because when you talk about AI bias and mitigating bias, that sort of thing, a lot of times when you don't have certain data sets, you can use synthetic data to kind of oversample certain groups or data. And that's a way to kind of even out the playing field a little bit, because you have so much data, for example, like in English, and maybe you want to build some application and that in other languages, or maybe some of the languages like.
Yeah, I hate to cut you short because to me personally, it's a really, really interesting discussion, and maybe we shall have a special conversation on this data plateau, computation plateau, with all the capacity reaching its limits. What's next? But for now, I think it's time for Merve to step in. And, I was fascinated while reading Merve's profile. The physicist, I think it was particle physics. It's the area where I'm a complete neophyte. And then, she became the AI developer. And I think, as Larry attested, it's really critical for the young people, the young generation, to step in and get engaged in AI to take it to the next level. Because we all have this, procrastination in our approaches. Unfortunately, age, and it's one of the factors. I feel I'm the last one who wants to be biased, but different generations sometimes can hardly communicate with each other at a level that they can communicate with themselves. So Merve, the floor is yours. And Tom, I know you had a question for Merve.
Yeah. So what do you think of regulations? Do you think that they're going to help or harm future development?
Well, thank you, Helen and Tom, for inviting me to this panel. I guess I'm the youngest of this panelists, and I am coming from a background of, I'm an ex-particle physicist. I was mainly using AI as an old technique in data processing, as Nathalie was explaining, on Fermi National Laboratory on G-2 experiment. Then I moved into the AI, and I started to building AI applications for different industries. And I am now here trying to bridge the information, trying to bridge the information gap between AI and the society, because I think there's a lot of biases towards AI, and people doesn't know how it actually functions, and it has a lot of probability involved. So I want to clarify the unanswered questions around how the actual technology works, so that people can start trusting how the system works, and they can actually take it to their own like day-to-day usage. And when it comes to regulating the AI, so like we've been like so far on the panel, we've been discussing like almost hand to hand with the social media platforms and AI. Like, have you guys ever like actually think about why we are like almost like not be able to separate these two? It's because of the fact that, so like my answer to this question is basically AI, when we're thinking about an AI model, we need to kind of like point out two parts. The first part is the architecture of an AI model, where it kind of like outlines the inner mechanism of an AI model and how it actually works and how the information like kind of like travel in an AI model and how the actual learning happens. And the other part is the data. So we feed data into these AI mechanisms and like the AI models, and then the learning actually happens. The importance of a social media platform comes from the fact that it actually provides data and it has the power to hold the user data. So all of us today are using social media, putting our pictures or faces or voices to social media. And then the generative AI models or the AI models can become very dangerous just using our faces or our own data. So as users, we should be aware of the fact that this can be harmful and we should protect our own data. But when it comes to regulations, obviously, there has to be regulations about the social platforms and how they are using my personal data. Because in the EU, we have the GDPR. We have the GDPR, and GDPR, luckily, transparently, like protecting us, protecting the user, and how my data is actually being used by these platforms. But unfortunately, in the US, there is no sharp protecting data policy around how my data will be used by those social media platforms. This is like one regulation that has to be done. On the other hand, when it comes to the regulation on the AI big tech companies, like when we are making an innovation, we don't want to like put kind of like restraints on how a technology or innovation can be made, because like we are creators, we are trying to basically, our aim is mainly try to do something, try to create a technology that will change the world. But it can be obviously it can be for the good, but it's like we don't know how it's going to be used at the end of the day. And then when it comes to the usage, that has to be regulated rather than regulating who is actually like doing what with these data sets.
So what you're saying is basically let the AI developer develop and then have some organization that will approve what they've developed or make them go back and change things.
Oh, well, kind of. Well, it can't be put it somehow that way, but what I am almost trying to say that like once, like the first time when these, like, for example, when we had like face detection, human detection, like models, because these systems are heavily based on the data set that we are showing them to. And if we don't have like a homogenic data sets that we are feeding these networks to, it will only recognize the cultures or the people or like the specific type of data that we are showing them. Let's say I am trying to train a model that's gonna recognize a cat, like all of the cats on the internet, like on the world. And if I am not showing a specific cat to this machine, it might recognize it as something else, right? We can't assume that that's going to happen. So I think as a developer, that might be my almost like it might be on me to check on what kind of data that I'm putting onto this data set, so that I can unbias the model, I can unbias the outcome. But when it comes to like controlling the outcome, that is unfortunately because of how the nature of these systems are working. It's mainly probabilistic. We cannot guarantee like what outcome I'm gonna get out of it. So it's like, yeah.
Well,
Okay, let's go ahead and let Kevin speak.
well, before we let Kevin speak, may I quickly ask Merve a question?
Sure.
Before we move on, like face recognition was one of the very early apps, and it's highly, I would say, provocative, because some say that face recognition shall become legal, including for its use for police profiling. But we have a very recent case in New York with the insurance CEO being shot, and the criminal who allegedly, I would say the main suspect at the moment, was caught thanks to the face recognition technology. So what is your opinion? Is face recognition legit? It's very restrictive in Europe and consequently UK, but it is widely utilized in the US. What is your thought about it?
So like when we are like, let's say, Helen, I am trying to build a mechanism that's going to recognize your face. So if I have a couple of pictures of you, and I can also synthetically, like if I know your face, if I know you in real life, I can also like create synthetic data of your face. And I can today, with all of the sources that's available to me right now, I can actually build a model that will recognize your face. But when it comes to putting this on application, in the EU, it is forbidden that I can actually like sell this or I can use it unless it is for academic purposes. But in the US, this is unfortunately not the case. Like you don't have a specific regulations with the data or like what kind of application that I am like serving. So that is very important.
Yes, this might be another subject for our special discussion, because this could be an endless conversation, because of course, like with everything, there are pros and cons. But Tom, we were passing the floor to Kevin Quincey, my wonderful Kellogg classmate, who is the managing partner of XLab, and who has been incredibly instrumental and helpful in arranging this event. So do you have a question for Kevin, or Kevin, you have a question?
Yeah, just go ahead and say what you need, what you want.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Let me thank you, Tom and Helen, for having us on here. I'm just going to expand a little bit on what Solomon and Merve said, because they really covered everything real well. The thing I would only add, being both a U.S. and a UK citizen and living through the GDPR and taking a master's in information security during the process, and that GDPR is something that America should really strive towards, because when I look at how you're going to wrap policy around AI, if I had a magic wand, my first thing I would do is say, we're going to get to AI and regulating and helping to put boundaries around AI, but without the underlying PII and data control that the European Union has, it's going to really be like herding cats. I mean, I really don't see how you're going to make a lot of progress on putting policy around AI if, as Merve pointed out, a company can have a copy of someone's face and their identity and their fingerprints and everything about them, and don't have to tell the person and don't have to make that revocable and don't have to justify why they have that. You're really going to struggle with having anything that does any reasonable difference in the AI space. if you don't have any control of PII, if people can't have any kind of say in their data and who has their data. Because right now, no one has to report who has their, in the US, you don't have to tell people, I have your data. If you have a data breach, California law does push the envelope forward a tiny, tiny bit. But if someone has a data breach, say they lose a laptop in the US and there were 100,000 customers on it, that company does need to notify all those customers that they lost that data. They are required by California law to do that. Many companies don't. The enforcement on that is very weak. In the European Union and the UK, when you have a breach like that, if you took no steps and you didn't tell people about it when it happened, you could very easily go out of business. It's 7% of your gross. I think it's 7%. I can't remember the exact numbers now, but it's a very large percentage of your global, not profit, global revenue. And so, you're really talking about some things that have teeth. And until the U.S. can do anything around that side of the data, I personally don't see. Anyway, I don't want to. I'm not an AI person yet. So I'm not trying to hijack your conversation and say you should all look at data instead of focusing on the AI. But I'm just saying that you're going to make a lot more progress if you work on on policies and regulations around that underlying piece that affects AI, but it also affects everything else. You brought up a lot of topics. Revenge porn and all these crazy things that are happening with photography, robotics, all these things have a hint of AI in them, but it's all down to the data. If you can't control where your data goes and you don't have a sense of ownership of your data. When I go to the hospital, I say, I want my data. I want all my scans. I want all my data. That gets to me. Sometimes I do have to file a GDPR request because it's sometimes even hospitals here have a little resistance to that. But I want that data. My family have a lot of doctors in it. I want to get that data. In the U.S., I have no grounds to get that data, and I can't get that data. So I get my blood tests and that's about it.
With all due respect, I would disagree with you. From a standpoint, you can request your data if you file a special form. Indeed, you can get all the data from any hospital or individual doctor's office. What really, I would say, bothers me is the slow pace of how the personal data that could be used for the advancement of healthcare, particularly, say, cancer and other areas of research, it could be sanitized. I was looking for a good word, and help immensely with the further progress of training the models. Because there was a recent case in the UK where a woman who was entitled for her last mammogram, I think it's at the age of 60, who had a mammogram, it was okay, but then luckily this mammogram was examined by AI and there was cancer. And without AI taking a peek at the very same mammogram that doctors really didn't diagnose with cancer, this woman would not have been treated at an early stage that she was. And in the US, I think it was in MIT and Massachusetts, one of the Massachusetts hospitals, the AI researcher who had breast cancer was unable to talk the doctors into using the AI. Finally, she was able to convince them to experiment because the doctors are paid less if they spend less time with the patient and consequently more efficient. So I personally would advocate, and of course, I used to work for the largest bank in Central and Eastern Europe. Our ecosystem included AI and robotics, and during COVID, we designed an app which analyzed lung CAT scans and allowed to hospitalize patients based on the extent of the lung damage. And it saved many lives. So I personally believe that data protection, of course, has to be exercised. But at the same time, data can be sanitized without necessarily being linked to a particular person. But these data sets could be really critically important for the advancement of science and healthcare in particular.
Absolutely, yeah. Anonymization of data is hard, but it's very important. And the more we can anonymize big data from health, NHS has more data than any organization, but they don't make very good use of it yet because their IT is a little behind the US's. But I just data security is important. Data anonymization for those uses is important. But privacy is the part that we often forget about. But if we don't trust the companies that have our data, it is going to be hard to make the progress that we want to make, and people won't trust an insurance company who goes around everyone's back and gets data from your car, and takes that data and doesn't tell anyone that they're taking that data from GM, and so it's if we don't work on the privacy side of it, the consumer is the one that's going to pay the immediate price, but our making progress on technology is going to pay the price too. Because we don't have those guardrails. The guardrails are actually helpful to making progress on this. Hopefully that helps. But yeah.
I see a comment from Jeff Holon. Jeff, do you want to ask a question? Is just Jeff have a voice or?
He fell off.
I'm trying to find him on the. I don't see.
It's okay.
Okay.
It's okay. Merve, is there anything you would like to add? And actually, I would like to ask all of our panel participants to have like a quick round to summarize, say, returning to the actual subject of our conversation. If I give you a magic wand, what kind of policy change, if any, would you like to recommend to the incoming administration and Congress? Who was first? Eric, why don't we start from you?
Okay. Again, thank you. So glad to be here. Really enjoyed listening to everybody's perspective. I think, quite honestly, the way we're approaching this whole thing is holistically. We look to collaborate across the industries and with policymakers to start talking about the higher level values, ethical questions, and things like that will allow us to start thinking further down the line. We don't live in sustainable times right now. We've got a lot of problems that are interfering with, critical decision making on how we want to regulate this ground, breaking technology. And I think we need to restore just a collaborative sense of community around issues like this and engage in fundamental conversations with technologists, with legal folks like myself, policy people, and industry stakeholders. We want to, have a creative place for our AI generators to make the groundbreaking technologies, and we want to be honest about risk and harm and address those appropriately in a healthy way. And I think policy that I would just like to see the administration in the United States make AI a priority. Would like to really hear what the administration's thoughts are, and we need to move well beyond where it was, 6 years ago when Trump's executive order on AI came out, and certainly beyond where Biden's was. So if they make it a priority and we get some of the best minds around these issues, then I'm sure we can tackle the nuance and the complex.
Well, based on the star team that is being assembled in the new administration, including Elon Musk, I personally am very hopeful that this will happen. Nathalie.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I really enjoyed listening to the perspectives and to the conversation. If I had a magic wand, I think I would say that regulation need to provide clear limits on some uses which are harmful, and we could even say criminal. But also, I think that if we want to have real impact, we need to really create a sort of willingness for people to move in the right direction, because I am convinced that most of the people working in AI are good people and want to make sure that AI is used in an appropriate way. And for this, we need to sort of provide this positive willingness to move in the right direction. And so government should not only create limitations and I would say negative frameworks, but also should provide the right resources to help AI developers actually do the work well and provide them with the right transparent and accurate elements to build trust and to foster further use of AI. You know, having the right maybe repository for the data, getting you know, government agencies to provide advice and not only limitations and surveillance to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Solomon?
From my point of view, I think when you approach policy, one thing that we have to strongly always consider is that we are all stakeholders. So so we have to think about these entities, whether it's the government, when they want to enact policies, regulations, mandates, or anything like that, they have to work for all citizens. And we shouldn't give up our privacy, safety, freedom, just because they might be not convenient for maybe large companies or companies that are developing AI. We're all part of it. So when we approach this, I think whichever administration, whatever team, I think like citizens, informed citizens, policy experts, like should all be involved, because whether you realize it or not, maybe in the short term, maybe some things could be in favor of certain companies or certain tech innovation, but in the long term, we're all involved. So I think that's something we have to keep in mind and educate everybody. Like, you're part of this, your data is part of this. Like, AI will eventually affect us all.
Merve? I wholeheartedly agree with you, Salman. I just
Same here.
mentioned certain stuff in the closing remarks, but thank you for what you just said, because it's exactly why we organized this event. Merve?
So I just want to say that, like, literally every pixel counts. Like, every part of my data out there on the social media, it's my, like, this is my responsibility to be able to just like sign up, like check the terms and services, like content of the services, like conditions when I'm signing up to the platforms. I need to be able to seek out whether there are regulations on these applications, websites, services. Like, I am responsible as a citizen. Also, I believe government proactively choose to like include the citizens during the policy making process, because this is also for us. This is, I'm going to be the one who's be affected by this AI regulations. So government can choose to include the citizens to like literally actively participate to the surveys, or like our voice needs to be heard as like the end user, as an end user of an AI. And I'm saying this as a developer as well, but like, I want to be like, I will be actually like very happy, and I will feel safe if I'm seeing, hearing like the transparency of like these technologies. And if my opinion actually matters at the end of the day as a user, I will be less scared to use these systems and move forward to the new future that actually like we will be liberated from the mundane tasks of the daily life, and like we will be more creative with the AI. So there's nothing to be scared. It's just like the way that how it will be presented to us. So I think, yeah, like it will be great to be able to like almost like ask everyone to participate in this, like, you know, like the policy making process.
Absolutely. Tom, first of all, I want to thank Tom Testi, who has been, you know, technically hosting our event today. He is the director of the Global Alliance on Sustainability NAI Director of Technical Education. And Tom, I'm giving you a magic wand. What would you like to recommend?
Well, I think I agree with both Solomon and Merve in the sense that I think it has to be, the government can't just impose the regulations. It has to be a combination, and I don't even necessarily agree that the Elon Musks or the top echelon should be the ones involved. Well, they can be involved, but it needs to be a lower level because they have massive billion-dollar companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, almost trillion-dollar companies in some cases, and they have their biases too. So we can't forget that because they're all working for their own sake. It needs to be not necessarily policy expert, but AI experts from more of a well-rounded group.
Well, I would like to
Don't forget Kevin. Don't forget Kevin. He can.
Well, Kevin, indeed, Kevin is a contributor today. He got to ask his question, but Kevin,
Maybe.
the magic wand is yours.
Hey, you guys really, this is a really great group here, and you guys really touched on everything that I would have as a magic wand. I think we just need to keep in mind that our government works for us, and we are, as Solomon said, we're all stakeholders, we're all owners of the results here and of what we demand here. But don't let something that's inconvenient for a certain government or for any government get in our way. It's what we want that the government must enact. So that's I think sometimes I won't get on my data high horse again, but I think but having lived in both sides of the pond here, I just see how little U.S. citizens, how quickly U.S. citizens give up on their privacy. You know, I've heard so many times from my fellow U.S. citizens, privacy's dead. You know, there's no sense in trying to get privacy back because it's already gone. And it's like, you know, that horse hasn't left the barn. You know, we do have a right to privacy, and we do have a right to own our data, and we do have a right to know how our data is being used. So, and we need to demand that our government do that for us and help us and control the negative uses of the AI and the negative uses of all these technologies. They need to step in and create a framework that everyone wants to do the right thing. Most of our developers want to do the right thing. So just we got to create some guardrails so that they can do that.
And this is a question from Hugo that I'm just going to throw out there, and anybody can, you know, because we've been talking about the EU, we've talked about China, the US. What about countries like Africa or South America? How do they, you know, what can they do? As Hugo says, how can this benefit those of us in Nigeria? I'm open to more learning.
So yeah. I'll share that I've actually spent some time in West Africa. So not specifically Nigeria, but I spent some time in Togo and Ghana. And that was a while ago. But so as far as just kind of big picture take on it, I would think like when we're kind of entering this world of AI and like digital technologies, a lot of the challenges, at least from my experience, is like if you wanted to build companies or organizations, it could be very hard with just how business can be done. So if you embrace kind of like these policies that are very comprehensive, then, you know, either outside investors or external stakeholders might kind of see Africa as a great opportunity, and Africa is a great opportunity. It's just kind of developing this maturity, which includes policies to kind of say like, there's a lot of smart people in Africa. There's a lot of market opportunities. If you can come in and then you have policies that people are very open to, you know, they know where the data is going, they know it can benefit them, then you can develop a right environment for a lot of growth in Africa.
Well, yeah. I will give you the floor, Nathalie, in a second. Just wanted to comment on Uga. Uga Chinwuba is really, he's basically like an intern with us, with the Global Alliance on Sustainability and AI. He's very active volunteering for, you know, to market our activities. And this is also a great opportunity for me to thank our director of government, outreach and advocacy, Philippe de Leon, who is with us today, who inspired me to think about this program. And so Tom and I were working on it. And, it's thanks to you, to the people like Hugo, and of course, Philip, for this endless inspiration that we were able to produce this. Sorry, Nathalie, I didn't mean to.
Thank you, which I just wanted to complement what Solomon had just said. I worked a bit in Africa too, and what I've seen, and perhaps it's just a very small part of the whole market, but I've seen African AI developers really starting to, one of the first questions they asked themselves was, with which type of system should we try to fit? And so one of the first things that very often they tackled was to start to be GDPR compliant if they felt that they wanted to start to enter the EU market, because they felt that if they could fit with GDPR, then they could go everywhere else. And so some of the AI developers now that I'm in contact with in Africa are starting to take the EU AI Act as being the standard and trying to see how they can apply it to their own technologies. Now, I'm not sure they will go through the complete book. And of course, I'm European, and perhaps I have a bias looking at, and perhaps this is why I've been in contact with them. But this, I think, is quite interesting in the way they are starting to approach the topics.
I think Eric had a comment too.
Yeah, I think just kind of dovetailing on what I'm hearing here, I think there's a lot of opportunity in Africa. I think a lot of African nations are looking for the transformative power that AI offers. We look at different segments like medicine, the way we can provide profound new medical treatments and breakthroughs for the on-the-ground medical provider. We can a lot of great work in the intentional communities, resilient communities that have coming out in a variety of different African nations. Democratic Republic of Congo is another nation that's looking very closely at opportunities within the next administration for technology innovation. A lot of these African countries have very young demographics. Significant percentages under the age of 35 or under the age of 40, which presents a really interesting novel opportunity to generationally change the current trajectory if innovative technologies could come in and provide education and training and workforce and investment and things like that. So I think Africa becomes a central figure in international technological advancement and through AI for sure. And nobody should be sleeping on Africa for sure.
Absolutely not, because one of our upcoming events will be in Africa. We already discussed this with Philippe de Leon, and indeed Tom. We will announce, I think soon, when we will have the event on AI in Africa, but I can't agree with you more regarding the immense potential that Africa presents, and with its really increasingly educated workforce. And Uga just commented that he doesn't sleep on Africa. And by Uga is really incredibly proactive professional, and he's looking for an internship or a remote job pertaining to AI. I invite everyone to contact us, and we'll provide Uga's contacts so we could put you together. I think we're kind of approaching our time limit. We actually overspent our time, but with your kind permission, I will take a moment, for some closing notes. So appalled with the technical glitch, which didn't allow to use my camera on the laptop so I could have a meaningful Zoom. So in the first part of our event, I thought I'll be completely brain dead and will not be able to murmur a word, not to say the opening remarks. So those who know me were probably puzzled with the frozen Helen who opened the event. But in closing, I spent a lot of my time and put a lot of my heart into researching the subject. And just yesterday, I listened to an interview with the father of one of the godfathers of AI, Geoffrey Hinton. And Geoffrey Hinton, who, and of course, my battery is going low. Geoffrey Hinton left Google after 10 years of being employed there, and he's one of the godfathers of AI. I'm pretty sure his compensation was not bad, but he left Google to be able to openly discuss the risks of AI, among other reasons, so that he does not have a conflict of interest. To me, this is a really epitome to decency, integrity. But if you find his interview on 60 Minutes, again, this is Geoffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner of 2024. He talks at length about the history of AI, how it was created, and in part his personal opinion, but significant, what was really resonating with me is his concern about the inability to control AI. And he did confirm that AI can think, it like feels it, it can react. And at some point, it can become autonomous. And its managers, it's not a direct quote, but the gist of what I learned from his interview was that he was concerned with inability to control AI to an extent where he compared what he did to what Oppenheimer had to say about the invention of hydrogen bomb, because AI, when it's generative, will have the capacity, in the creator's opinion, to destroy humanity. So it's not a joke. But overall, what I would love to share also, that he does not have regrets about inventing AI. So we, the people, all of us stakeholders globally, have to engage into creating meaningful policies to guardrail, to protect all of us, making sure that the AI is safe, efficient. We need to insist, to reach out, do everything possible that, to ensure that our governments, including legislators, not just the administration, collaborate with each other. And this is the only way for us to probably survive and to maintain humanity the way we know it. With this, I would love, to thank all of you for taking your time, for being with us. We have not been perfect technically today, but we're so young. We are basically a startup. When I created the Global Alliance on Sustainability and AI, and again, in the beginning, I was so stressed with inability to use my laptop, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Helen Teplitskaia, and I'm the president and founder of Global Alliance on Sustainability and AI, and chair and global managing partner of IMNEX Group. I'm not gonna market my consulting firm right now. I would like to invite you to visit the website of Global Alliance on Sustainability and AI. It's very easy to remember. It's GASAI, GASAI.ai. I invite all of you to contribute your recommendations, reach out to us, because we're starting to collect our recommendations to the incoming administration and Congress. And we agree to disagree with those who say that it's only to AI experts per se to have it stay in the further policy development. We will have our voice heard, And with this, I wish you all very happy holidays. Have a wonderful time. I believe in miracles. I give you a magic wand. Whatever wishes you want to be implemented. I love you all, and to the next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Enjoyed it.